What if I told you that every person you've ever met, every stranger on the street, every friend, every family member, shares something so remarkable that it defies belief? Tonight, dear listener, we're uncovering one of science's most astonishing discoveries. Genetic evidence that reveals humanity once balanced on the very edge of extinction, and how that near catastrophe created the foundation for everything we've achieved as a species. The numbers are staggering. Roughly 70,000 years ago, all of humanity, the entire genetic foundation for every person who has ever lived, was reduced to perhaps 2,000 individuals. Imagine that, 2,000 people carrying the complete genetic blueprint for billions of future humans, scattered across Africa during one of the most challenging periods in our planet's history. This isn't speculation or ancient folklore. This extraordinary story comes from cutting-edge genetic research, scientists literally reading the survival tale written in our DNA. The evidence is hiding in plain sight within every cell of your body, a genetic memory of humanity's most crucial chapter that we've only recently learned how to decode. Let me invite you to imagine those ancient landscapes for a moment. Picture the vast stretches of Africa around 70,000 years ago. The climate was shifting, becoming drier and more challenging. Resources that had sustained larger populations were becoming scarce. And in this crucible of environmental pressure, something extraordinary was happening to our species. Here's what makes this discovery so compelling. Despite our billions of diverse populations today, human genetic diversity is remarkably narrow compared to other large mammals. Scientists call these telltale signatures genetic bottlenecks, evidence that our population once contracted to an almost impossibly small number. It's as if all of humanity's genetic diversity passed through the eye of a needle, and somehow emerged intact on the other side. When researchers first began mapping these genetic patterns in the late 20th century, they discovered something astonishing. Despite the billions of people who now call Earth home, despite our spread across every continent and our incredible diversity of cultures, languages, and appearances, we all share a remarkably narrow genetic foundation. Picture a vast family tree stretching back through time, its countless branches all converging on a single, slender trunk. We are, in the most literal sense, all cousins, descendants of that small group who somehow persevered through what scientists now call the late Pleistocene population bottleneck. Dr. Spencer Wells, a leading geneticist, describes this period as humanity's closest brush with extinction. The genetic evidence suggests that for thousands of years, our entire species teetered on the edge of disappearing forever. Every technological innovation, every work of art, every poem, every act of love, every moment of human compassion that would follow, all depended on this small group of survivors navigating through what must have been the most challenging period in human history. But here's where the story becomes even more remarkable. These weren't just random survivors. The genetic analysis reveals that this bottleneck population possessed something special, something that would prove crucial not just for survival, but for the extraordinary journey that lay ahead. They carried within their genetic makeup the potential for remarkable adaptability, creativity, and resilience that would eventually allow humans to spread across the globe and thrive in environments from Arctic tundra to tropical rainforests. Consider the profound implications of this discovery. Every human achievement, from the first cave paintings to the symphonies of Beethoven, from the pyramids of Egypt to the exploration of space, all traces back to the small band of survivors who refused to give up during humanity's darkest hour. We are all, quite literally, the children of heroes who faced impossible odds and somehow found a way forward. When you wake up tomorrow morning and feel the warmth of sunlight streaming through your window, remember that this simple pleasure connects you to countless generations who also found hope in the daily return of light. When you share a meal with people you care about, you're participating in the same basic human ritual that sustained our ancestors through their darkest hours. When you face a challenge at work or in your personal life and feel that spark of determination to keep trying, you're accessing the same inner strength that carried humanity through its most precarious moment. The geneticists who discovered this extraordinary chapter in our story weren't just uncovering abstract scientific data. They were revealing the origin story of every human quality we most cherish. Our capacity for love, for creativity, for perseverance, for hope in the face of overwhelming odds. All of these were forged and refined during humanity's greatest test. The DNA evidence shows us that we don't just happen to possess these qualities by accident. They were specifically selected for, strengthened, and passed down by ancestors who survived precisely because they refused to give up on the future. This scientific revelation transforms how we understand not just where we came from, but who we are today. Imagine, if you will, that every time you extend a helping hand to someone in need, You're channeling the same cooperative spirit that allowed those ancient survivors to share resources during the harshest winters. Every act of kindness you perform, every creative project you pursue, every moment when you choose hope over despair. These aren't just individual choices. They're expressions of genetic memories that stretch back to those crucial millennia when such choices meant the difference between human extinction and human survival. Picture a small group huddled around a fire during the endless winter nights, their minds working not just on immediate survival, but on something deeper, the birth of human creativity itself. Archaeological evidence from this period shows the emergence of new tool technologies, the first clear evidence of symbolic thought and artistic expression, and the development of more sophisticated hunting and gathering strategies. It's as if the pressure of near extinction sparked something profound in human consciousness, awakening capabilities that had been dormant. Picture the moment when the first human carved abstract patterns into stone, not for any practical purpose, but simply to create something beautiful, something meaningful. This wasn't just decoration. It was the birth of art, of symbolic thinking, of the uniquely human ability to create meaning beyond mere survival. These early artists were expressing something profound about their inner lives, their hopes, their understanding of their place in the cosmos. The tools they developed during this period weren't just more efficient. They were more elegant, more sophisticated, showing evidence of planning and forethought that went beyond immediate necessity. A spear point crafted during this era might take days to complete, shaped with such precision and artistry that it served as both functional tool and expression of human creativity. Most remarkably, evidence suggests that these bottleneck populations developed the first proto-languages complex enough to transmit abstract concepts across generations. They weren't just grunting and pointing. They were telling stories, sharing philosophical insights, creating the rich verbal tapestries that would eventually become human literature, poetry, and song. What's particularly moving about this story is how it reframes our understanding of human nature itself. We often focus on the conflicts and divisions that seem to separate us, but the genetic evidence reveals a deeper truth. We are all part of an extended family whose roots trace back to a small group of individuals who faced the ultimate test of survival and emerged victorious not through violence or domination, but through cooperation, innovation, and an unbreakable will to continue. The research techniques that revealed this hidden chapter of our story are themselves marvels of modern science. By analyzing mitochondrial DNA, which passes from mother to child virtually unchanged, scientists can trace maternal lineages back through time. Similarly, Y chromosome analysis allows them to follow paternal lineages. When they mapped these genetic highways backward through time, they all converged on that crucial period around 70,000 years ago, when humanity's genetic diversity contracted to its narrowest point. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this discovery is what it tells us about resilience itself. These early humans didn't just endure. They laid the foundation for everything that would follow. They developed the cultural innovations, the social structures, and the adaptive strategies that would eventually allow their descendants to become the most successful large mammal on Earth. As we settle deeper into this story, imagine yourself sitting beside those ancient survivors, feeling the warmth of their fires under star-filled African skies. You can almost hear the gentle murmur of voices sharing knowledge, see the tender care as they tended to their children, and sense that unbreakable determination that somehow maintained hope in the face of overwhelming challenges. They couldn't have known that they were carrying the entire future of humanity in their choices, their innovations, and their determination to survive. The implications extend far beyond mere historical curiosity. Understanding this bottleneck period helps explain certain puzzles about human genetics, such as why we have relatively low genetic diversity compared to other large mammal species, and why certain genetic diseases appear across seemingly unrelated populations. It also provides insights into human psychology and behavior, suggesting that many of our social instincts and survival strategies were forged during this crucible period. What becomes clear from the genetic evidence is that survival wasn't just about individual resilience. It required unprecedented levels of cooperation and social organization. These small groups had to share resources, coordinate hunting and gathering activities, and care for the vulnerable members of their communities. The very traits that we consider most essentially human, our capacity for empathy, cooperation, and long-term planning, were likely refined and strengthened during this period of extreme challenge. As you drift off to sleep tonight, carry with you this remarkable truth. You are the descendant of survivors, of individuals who faced the ultimate test and refused to surrender. In your DNA, you carry the genetic legacy of heroes who looked into an uncertain future and chose hope over despair, action over resignation, The scientific evidence reveals layer upon layer of this extraordinary survival story. When geneticists examine the diversity of human mitochondrial DNA today, they find something remarkable. A bottleneck so severe that all of humanity can trace its maternal lineage back to just a few hundred women who lived through this crucial period. Similarly, Y chromosome analysis reveals that all modern human paternal lineages converge on an equally small number of men who survived these darkest millennia. This genetic archaeology tells us that these survivors weren't just physically resilient. They were cognitively advanced, socially sophisticated, and culturally innovative in ways that set them apart from earlier human populations. The archaeological record from this period shows the first clear evidence of complex symbolic behavior, advanced tool technologies, and the kind of strategic long-term thinking that would prove crucial for the expansion out of Africa that followed. Consider the profound psychological strength required to maintain hope during such prolonged hardship. Picture yourself trying to find warmth during an endless winter that seems to have no end, yet still telling stories to comfort frightened children, still believing that spring will eventually return. These weren't just a few difficult seasons, but potentially thousands of years when human populations remained perilously small, when every harsh winter or extended drought could have meant the end of our species entirely. Yet somehow, these remarkable ancestors found ways not just to endure, but to preserve and build upon the knowledge and skills that would eventually enable humanity's greatest adventure. But this is only the beginning of our story. Picture yourself standing with these remarkable survivors at the edge of their known world, sensing that something momentous is about to unfold. For these remarkable survivors, having passed through the crucible of near extinction, were about to face new challenges that would test their newly forged resilience in ways they could never have imagined. The world around them was changing, and the very environmental pressures that had brought them to the brink of extinction were about to present them with both new dangers and extraordinary opportunities. The climate was shifting once again, bringing different patterns of rainfall, temperature, and seasonal variation that would require entirely new strategies for survival. The African landscapes they had learned to navigate so skillfully were transforming, creating both challenges and possibilities that would demand every ounce of the adaptability and creativity that had carried them through the bottleneck period. How did they adapt to these changing conditions? What innovations allowed them to not just survive, but to begin the greatest expansion in human history? Imagine yourself standing at the edge of their world, watching as these remarkable survivors prepared to write the next chapter of human history. The answers to these questions reveal how they began to transform not just their own fate, but the very landscape of human possibility. Sleep well, knowing that within you flows the blood of the most resilient beings who ever lived, and that their story of triumph over impossible odds continues in every heartbeat, every breath, every moment of your own remarkable existence. And so we find ourselves drawn deeper into this extraordinary tale, where the very air they breathed carried the weight of change. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine stepping outside your cozy modern home into a world where the sky itself seemed different, where each dawn brought uncertainty written across the horizon in hues of amber and shadow. The earth our ancestors knew was transforming in ways both subtle and profound. Winter was no longer the gentle seasonal visitor that graced the land with predictable rhythms. Instead, it had become something altogether more formidable, arriving with an icy grip that seemed to tighten year after year. Picture yourself standing in what was once a fertile valley, feeling the bite of wind that carries not just cold, but whispers of a world in transition. The summers, once reliable in their warmth, had grown erratic and brief. One season might scorch the earth with unprecedented heat, leaving crops withered and water sources diminished to mere memories of their former abundance. The next might bring such unusual cooling that harvest time became a desperate race against frost that arrived far too early. Each family learned to read the sky like a sacred text, searching for signs of what the coming months might bring. In this transformed landscape, the very ground beneath their feet told stories of change. Picture the morning when an elder first noticed that the familiar river of her childhood had shifted its course in the night. Rivers that had flowed for countless generations began to shift their courses, some drying to trickles while others swelled beyond their banks in sudden violent floods. The permafrost, that ancient foundation of the northern territories, began its slow retreat, revealing earth that hadn't seen sunlight for millennia. Yet in this world of uncertainty, there was something remarkable about the human response. Picture a small village nestled against rolling hills, where smoke rises from chimneys in the early morning light, and you can almost hear the gentle sounds of daily life beginning. These communities faced each challenge with the quiet determination that has always defined our species in times of trial. The farmers learned to read new patterns in the soil, adapting their methods with the wisdom of generations combined with the necessity of survival. They developed innovative techniques for storing water during the increasingly unpredictable rains, creating underground reservoirs and ingenious irrigation systems that could function even when the skies withheld their bounty for months at a time. Imagine walking through these settlements during the difficult years, when winter stretched longer than memory suggested it should. Feel the crunch of snow beneath your feet as you approach a dwelling where warm light spills from the windows. You might see families gathered around hearths, sharing not just warmth but knowledge, passing down stories that contained practical wisdom about surviving in an ever-changing world. The elderly spoke of seasons past, while the young listened with the intensity of those who knew their survival might depend on remembering every detail. The forests themselves became teachers in this new reality. Trees that had grown straight for centuries began to lean and adapt, their roots searching deeper for stability as the patterns of rainfall shifted. The wise among these communities learned to read these natural signals, understanding that the forest was writing instructions for survival in the language of leaf and branch. During the harshest periods, when the bite of winter lingered well into what should have been spring, communities discovered the profound strength that emerges from unity. Picture a scene that captures the very essence of human resilience. Neighbors gathering in a dimly lit home, sharing their carefully rationed stores of grain with quiet dignity. Children playing games that unknowingly prepare them for the realities of their changing world, where the simple act of sharing a warm meal becomes both sustenance and hope. The oceans, those vast blue expanses that had long been highways of trade and exploration, began to speak in new voices. Coastal communities found themselves adapting to rising waters that arrived not with dramatic fanfare, but with the patient persistence of tide pools gradually claiming new territory. Fishermen learned to read different currents, to find abundance in waters that had shifted their ancient patterns. Yet, even in these times of environmental uncertainty, there were moments of breathtaking beauty. Imagine standing on a hilltop as dawn breaks over this transformed landscape, watching the mist rise from valleys where new wetlands have formed overnight. The very air seems to shimmer with possibility, as if the earth itself is whispering secrets about adaptation and resilience. Picture those morning moments when the world felt newly made, when the light filtering through altered atmospheric conditions created sunrises unlike any seen before. The sky painted itself in colors that had no names, shifting between copper and rose and deep purple in ways that made even the most practical survivors pause in wonder. These weren't just beautiful spectacles. They were reminders that change could bring wonder as well as hardship, that adaptation could reveal unexpected gifts alongside its challenges. The wildlife, too, became part of this grand story of change. Birds altered their migration patterns, following new routes across continents as ancient landmarks transformed. Animals that had never shared territories before found themselves neighbors, creating ecosystems that were entirely novel yet somehow perfectly balanced. Imagine the first time a community spotted a species of bird that had never been seen in their region before. Its bright plumage a splash of tropical color against the familiar landscape. These arrivals weren't just curiosities. They brought new knowledge about food sources, weather patterns, and seasonal changes that helped inform human survival strategies. The great herds of animals that had sustained hunting communities for generations began to shift their routes, following new water sources and grazing grounds created by the changing climate. This required hunters to become students all over again, learning to read new signs, to understand different patterns, to adapt techniques that had been passed down through countless generations. Yet these challenges also created opportunities for innovation that would have been impossible in more stable times. Some communities discovered that the changing conditions made possible entirely new forms of resource management. Areas that had been too dry for certain types of plant cultivation suddenly became viable as rainfall patterns shifted. Regions that had never supported particular animals became home to new species that brought fresh opportunities for hunting and domestication. The transforming world wasn't just taking things away. It was also offering new possibilities for those resourceful enough to recognize and seize them. The seasonal cycles themselves became teachers in ways they had never been before. Communities learned to read the subtle signs of early springs, extended autumns, and winters that arrived with different intensities than their grandparents had known. Children grew up with an intuitive understanding of variability and adaptation that their elders had to learn through experience, making them better prepared for continued change throughout their lives. Water sources, perhaps the most crucial element for survival, required entirely new strategies for location and management. Ancient wells and springs sometimes failed or changed their flow patterns, while new sources appeared in unexpected places. This led to the development of more sophisticated methods for finding, testing, and preserving water that would serve humanity well as populations eventually expanded into new territories, with different hydrogeographical challenges. Picture harvest festivals where the gratitude was not just for abundance, but for the very fact that growth was still possible, that seeds still remembered how to become grain, that the partnership between human care and natural bounty could still flourish. The mountains, those eternal guardians of the landscape, began to reveal new faces as glaciers retreated and exposed rocks that had been hidden for millennia. These changes created new water sources in some regions, while transforming others into landscapes of stark beauty, where adaptation meant learning to find resources in places previously thought barren. Through all of these environmental shifts, what emerges most clearly is the remarkable capacity of communities to not merely survive, but to discover new forms of flourishing. The children born into this changing world grew up with an intuitive understanding of flexibility, learning to see opportunity where their grandparents might have seen only challenge. As seasons turned and years passed in this transformed world, something profound was taking shape. The isolated struggles of individual families were gradually weaving together into a larger tapestry of collective wisdom. Each community's innovations in farming, water management, and seasonal adaptation began to spread through networks of trade and kinship, creating a growing repository of knowledge about thriving in an uncertain world. The very act of sharing these survival strategies became the foundation for something larger, something that would prove even more crucial than individual resilience. For in this harsh world, where environmental challenges tested every assumption about how life could be lived, communities were discovering that their greatest resource wasn't stored grain or fresh water, but the bonds they formed with one another. And as we settle into this understanding of the world they faced, we begin to sense another story emerging from the mists of change. In this landscape of environmental challenge and adaptation, where survival demanded both innovation and cooperation, how did scattered groups of people begin to recognize that their fates were intertwined? How did the necessity of facing an uncertain world together begin to forge the bonds that would reshape the very meaning of community itself? But survival isn't just about finding food or staying warm. The real magic happened when these scattered families realized something that would change everything. Together, they were stronger than the sum of their parts. Imagine, if you will, watching from above as small groups of humans began to drift toward one another across the landscape, like scattered stars, slowly forming their first constellation. Picture Sarah, a young mother clutching her infant close, spotting smoke rising from a distant hillside. Her heart races, not with fear, but with hope. Could there be others? Others who might share the burden of these endless, exhausting days? As she approaches cautiously, her weathered husband Michael beside her, they discover something beautiful. Another family, just like theirs, huddled around a small fire. The relief is overwhelming. For the first time in months, Sarah isn't scanning the horizon for threats. She's looking into the eyes of another woman who understands exactly what she's been through. This scene played out thousands of times across the planet. Families finding families. Small groups discovering they didn't have to face the darkness alone. And from these chance encounters, something extraordinary began to emerge. The first true human communities. And from these chance encounters, something extraordinary began to emerge. The first true human communities. Think about how revolutionary this was. For the first time in human history, people weren't just surviving as isolated family units. They were choosing to stay together, to build something larger than themselves. They were choosing to stay together, to build something larger than themselves. Children who might have grown up knowing only their parents and siblings suddenly had aunts and uncles, grandparents and cousins, not by blood, but by choice. The warmth that filled these early camps wasn't just from the fires they shared. Picture yourself settling into sleep beside one of those ancient hearths, feeling that deep sense of security that comes from true community. It was the warmth of belonging, of knowing that when you closed your eyes at night, someone else was keeping watch. When your child fell ill, other mothers would bring remedies their own grandmothers had taught them. When the men returned empty-handed from a hunt, there might still be food because another family had been more fortunate. Picture young David, maybe 7 years old, who had spent his earliest years seeing only his parents' worried faces. Now suddenly he's surrounded by other children. They're creating games from sticks and stones, inventing stories by firelight, learning that laughter can echo off cave walls and make even the coldest nights feel warmer. For David, this isn't just survival anymore. It's the beginning of childhood itself. These communities weren't large by our standards. Imagine a gathering small enough to fit comfortably around a single large fire. Maybe 30 to 40 people at most. Small enough that everyone knew everyone else's name, everyone's fears, everyone's strengths. But within these intimate circles, human nature began to flourish in ways it never could in isolation. Watch as Elena, skilled with healing herbs, shares her knowledge with younger women. See how Thomas, who has a gift for reading animal tracks, patiently teaches the teenage boys. Notice how the elderly, like wise grandmother Anna, become treasured repositories of memory and wisdom. Their stories binding the group together with shared understanding of where they came from and who they are. The psychological impact was profound. Picture the relief of finally coming home after a long, frightening journey. That's what these early communities provided for the human spirit. Humans are social creatures at our very core, and these early communities satisfied a hunger that went deeper than food. They satisfied the hunger for connection, for understanding, for the simple comfort of knowing you're not alone in the world. When little Maria scraped her knee, she didn't just have her mother to comfort her. She had Auntie Rosa and cousin Elena and grandfather Juan, all ready to kiss away her tears and tell her she was brave. But perhaps most importantly, these communities became cradles of innovation. When minds come together, they spark in ways that isolated thinking never can. Picture the evening gatherings around the central fire, voices mixing as families shared their day's discoveries. Someone found a new type of root that stored well through winter. Another noticed that certain stones, when struck together, created better sparks. A third observed how smoke could be used to preserve meat for longer periods. These discoveries weren't just practical improvements. They represented the birth of human scientific thinking. Picture this moment of pure discovery. Imagine Sarah, an observant young mother, noticing that certain plants seemed to grow better near the areas where cooking fires had been built. Over many seasons, she begins experimenting, deliberately clearing small patches of ground and burning plant matter to create ash-enriched soil. Her careful observations and patient testing lay the groundwork for what would eventually become agriculture. Over many seasons, she begins experimenting, deliberately clearing small patches of ground and burning plant matter to create ash-enriched soil. The careful observations and patient testing lay the groundwork for what would eventually become agriculture. Or consider Willem, an elderly man with keen eyes for patterns, who begins to notice connections between the behavior of animals and changes in weather. He develops a system of signs and signals that help his community predict storms, droughts, and the best times for hunting. His knowledge becomes so reliable that neighboring groups seek him out for advice, creating the first informal networks of information sharing between communities. The innovation process itself became ritualized, sacred. Evening gatherings weren't just social occasions. They were humanity's first scientific conferences, where hypotheses were shared, results compared, and new experiments planned. Children grew up understanding that observation, testing, and sharing knowledge were among the most valuable contributions they could make to their community's survival. Each small discovery, shared freely within the community, became building blocks for survival techniques that would serve humanity for generations. This wasn't just cooperation. It was the birth of human culture itself, the foundation of everything we would eventually become. And through it all, there was an unbreakable spirit of resilience that bound these people together. When winter storms raged for days, threatening to tear apart their fragile shelters, they didn't despair alone. They weathered it together, sharing warmth, sharing food, sharing hope. When spring finally arrived and the world began to bloom again, their joy wasn't individual. It was communal. A celebration of having survived together what no family could have endured alone. The bonds formed in these early communities ran deeper than convenience. They were forged in the crucible of shared hardship, tempered by collective triumph. When old Henrik finally succumbed to his long illness, the entire community grieved together. When baby Sophia took her first steps, everyone celebrated as if she were their own child. These people had become something more than neighbors or allies. They had become chosen family. These tight-knit groups developed their own rhythms, their own traditions, their own ways of marking the passage of time. Maybe they sang certain songs when the moon was full, or told specific stories when the autumn leaves began to fall. These weren't just customs. They were threads weaving individual lives into a tapestry of shared experience. As days turned to seasons and seasons to years, something beautiful began to take shape. Community members started to specialize in what they did best. Maria had a gift for working with animal hides, turning them into warm, waterproof clothing. James seemed to know instinctively where to find the best stones for tools. Rebecca could predict weather patterns better than anyone else, helping the group prepare for storms or plan hunting expeditions. This specialization wasn't just practical, it was the foundation of human civilization. Each person's unique talents became gifts they offered to the whole community, and in return, they received the fruits of everyone else's specialties. It was cooperation raised to an art form, and it worked because trust had been built through countless small acts of kindness and support. But even in this cozy corner of human development, Daily life remained a constant challenge. Picture yourself waking up in one of these ancient settlements, feeling both the comfort of community and the weight of uncertainty that each new day brought. The communities had formed, the bonds had strengthened, and the foundations of human cooperation were firmly in place. Yet each dawn still brought the same fundamental question that had driven them together in the first place. How do we survive another day? The structure was there, the support systems were functioning, but the daily reality of finding food, maintaining shelter, and protecting the group from dangers both seen and unseen, that was still the heartbeat of every waking moment. What was daily life actually like for these resilient people who had found each other in the darkness and decided to build something beautiful together? As the soft light of dawn crept through the frozen windows of their modest homes, the villagers of this isolated settlement began their daily rituals with a quiet determination that had sustained them through countless harsh winters. Picture, if you will, the gentle sound of bare feet touching cold wooden floors, the soft whisper of breath visible in the frigid air, and the tender way families gathered close together for warmth and comfort. The daily rhythm of life in this remote corner of the world was both beautiful and deeply challenging. Picture yourself stirring in your bed as the first sounds of morning begin to echo through the settlement. Each morning began before sunrise, when the community's baker, a gentle soul named Martha, would rise in the pre-dawn darkness to kindle her ovens. The faint aroma of baking bread would slowly drift through the village like a warm embrace, signaling the start of another day. Imagine the cozy glow of her hearth, crackling softly as she kneaded dough with hands that had learned to work efficiently despite the bitter cold. In the house next door, Thomas the carpenter would stretch his weary muscles and reach for his worn leather boots, preparing for another day of essential repairs. The sound of his hammer would soon join the morning symphony, a rhythmic, comforting percussion that spoke of human industry and resilience. His workshop, though modest, was filled with the rich scent of wood shavings and the gentle warmth of carefully tended tools that had been passed down through generations. The children of the village had their own sacred rituals. Little Anne and her younger brother Samuel would wake to their mother's gentle touch, bundling together under thick woolen blankets as they prepared for the day's lessons. Education was precious here, a luxury that required sacrifice and dedication. Picture them gathering around the village's only book, their young voices creating a gentle murmur as they practiced reading by the flickering light of precious candles. As the morning sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered landscape, the villagers would emerge from their homes like careful dancers, each step deliberate and purposeful. Picture the quiet dignity in this daily ritual. The elderly Mrs. Eleanor, despite her 73 years, would make her daily journey to the community well, her weathered hands gripping a wooden bucket that had served her family for decades. Her footsteps in the snow created a path that others would follow, a silent testament to the way this community moved together in harmony. The midday hours brought their own rhythm of life. In the small communal garden, protected by carefully constructed windbreaks, a few hardy souls would tend to the precious root vegetables that would sustain them through the darkest months. Maria, the village's most skilled gardener, would speak softly to her plants as she worked, her gentle voice a soothing presence in the crisp air. The sound of her wooden spade against the frozen earth was like a quiet meditation, a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, life persisted. Inside the homes, the art of domestic survival unfolded with grace and wisdom. Women would gather in small groups, their skilled fingers working wool into warm garments while they shared stories in hushed, comforting tones. The clicking of knitting needles created a gentle percussion that seemed to echo the very heartbeat of the community. These moments of shared creativity were sacred, times when wisdom was passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. The village's blacksmith, a kind man named Robert, worked throughout the day at his forge, the warm glow of his fire visible through his workshop windows like a beacon of hope. The rhythmic ring of his hammer on metal was music to the villagers' ears, each strike representing another tool repaired, another problem solved, another day of survival secured. The heat from his forge would draw children and adults alike, who would linger nearby, warming their hands and sharing quiet conversations. Evening brought its own tender rituals. As darkness fell early in these northern latitudes, families would gather around their modest hearths, sharing simple meals prepared with ingredients that had been carefully preserved and rationed. The soft murmur of conversation, the gentle clink of wooden bowls, and the crackling of fires created a symphony of domestic peace that had echoed through these walls for generations. The village storyteller, an elderly man named David, would often visit different homes as darkness settled, carrying with him tales that transported listeners to warmer lands and easier times. His voice, weathered yet soothing, would weave narratives that helped the community forget, for precious moments, the harsh realities that surrounded them. Children would curl up close to their parents, their eyes heavy with sleep as they listened to stories of brave knights and beautiful princesses, their young minds finding escape in worlds where spring was eternal and food was abundant. As the night deepened, the village would settle into a peaceful quiet. Mothers would tuck their children into beds warmed with stones heated by the fire, whispering gentle lullabies that had been sung by generations of village mothers. The soft sound of these tender melodies would drift through thin walls, creating a community-wide embrace of comfort and security. The sound of steady, peaceful breathing filled the small homes like a meditation, a reminder that despite all challenges, life continued with quiet determination. But perhaps the most beautiful aspect of their daily life was the way the community cared for one another. When old Henrik became too frail to chop his own firewood, his neighbors silently took turns ensuring his woodpile remained full. When young Sarah fell ill with a fever, the village women took turns sitting by her bedside, offering herbal remedies and gentle comfort until she recovered. The daily sharing of resources happened with such natural grace that it seemed choreographed. Extra bread would appear on doorsteps without fanfare. Warm soup would be delivered to families with newborns. Skilled craftspeople would quietly repair tools for neighbors without being asked. This invisible network of care created a safety net that caught every member of the community when they stumbled. As each day drew to a close, there was a ritual of gratitude that permeated the village. Not spoken aloud, but felt in the gentle way neighbors nodded to each other in passing, in the warm smiles shared over garden fences, in the way hands lingered just a moment longer when tools were passed between families. It was gratitude for another day survived, another night of warmth shared, another moment of human connection preserved against the endless winter. Yet dangers lurked everywhere in this precarious existence. Challenges that could transform their carefully maintained peace into desperate struggle in the span of a heartbeat. The very survival that they had worked so hard to achieve was constantly threatened by forces both seen and unseen, testing their resilience and forcing them to remain vigilant even in their moments of greatest comfort. Facing these ever-present dangers, they discovered something profound about human nature itself. The real magic happened when these scattered families realized that together, they were stronger than the sum of their parts. Imagine, if you will, a world where every rustling bush might conceal a predator, where every weather change could mean the difference between feast and famine, where the simple act of gathering water required constant vigilance and careful planning. This was the reality these remarkable communities faced each day, yet they met these challenges not with despair, but with ingenuity and an unshakable commitment to one another's survival. Picture Willem, the community's most experienced hunter, waking before dawn with the instinctive awareness that something felt different in the air. The silence was too complete, the bird calls absent, the very atmosphere charged with intention that spoke to primal survival instincts honed over countless generations. Without waking the others, he would slip from his shelter and move silently through the settlement, checking for signs of the large predators that occasionally wandered too close to human habitation. The threat could come from any direction. Sometimes it was the massive cave bears, creatures of such size and power that even a well-organized hunting party would think twice before confronting one directly. Other times it might be packs of wolves, driven by harsh winters to consider human settlements as potential sources of sustenance. The most dangerous encounters often came from the great cats, silent, solitary hunters whose stealth made them nearly impossible to detect until they struck. But Willem and his fellow guardians had developed strategies that turned human weakness into collective strength. Picture the intricate system of warning signals they created. Combinations of whistles, gestures, and positioned objects that could communicate complex information about threats without alerting potential predators to human awareness. A series of small stones arranged near the water source might indicate the presence of large predators upstream. A particular pattern of scratched marks on certain trees could warn hunters about which paths had become dangerous. Maria, the community's healer, had perhaps the most crucial role in threat management. She had spent years learning to identify not just healing plants, but the subtle signs that indicated whether water sources were safe to drink, which foods might have spoiled, and how to recognize the early symptoms of diseases that could devastate a small population. Picture her careful daily inspections of the community's food stores, testing unfamiliar plants with systematic caution, and maintaining detailed mental maps of which areas were safe for gathering and which should be avoided. The children, too, played vital roles in the community's survival strategies. From their earliest years, they were taught to move quietly, to observe without being seen, and to recognize the difference between normal forest sounds and the subtle changes that might indicate danger. Little Samuel and his friends weren't just playing when they practiced sneaking games. They were developing skills that might one day save their lives and the lives of everyone they loved. When actual threats emerged, the community's response was swift and coordinated. Picture the moment when lookouts spotted a large predator approaching the settlement area. Without panic or confusion, families would implement practiced emergency procedures. The most vulnerable members, elderly, injured, or very young, would be quickly moved to the most defensible positions. Weapons would be distributed according to predetermined plans that took into account each person's skills and physical capabilities. But the most remarkable aspect of their threat management wasn't the dramatic moments of direct confrontation. It was the quiet, daily work of prevention and preparation that kept serious dangers from developing in the first place. Thomas, the toolmaker, spent countless hours maintaining and improving the community's arsenal of spears, knives, and defensive implements, ensuring that every weapon was balanced, sharp, and ready for use at a moment's notice. The community also developed sophisticated early warning networks with neighboring groups. Runners would carry information about predator movements, dangerous weather patterns, and other threats across considerable distances, creating a web of mutual protection that extended far beyond any single settlement. These networks represented some of humanity's earliest experiments in organized communication and collective security. Perhaps most importantly, Elna, with her gift for observation, could predict harsh weather days in advance by watching cloud formations, animal behavior, and changes in wind patterns. Her warnings gave the community precious time to secure food stores, reinforce shelters, and prepare for extended periods of confinement. The psychological aspect of living under constant potential threat created its own challenges and innovations. Community members developed rituals and practices that helped maintain morale and emotional stability even when external pressures were most intense. Evening gatherings served not just social functions, but helped identify individuals who might be struggling with the stress of perpetual vigilance. The simple act of sharing concerns and fears with trusted companions often prevented the kind of emotional breakdown that could compromise everyone's safety. The simple act of sharing concerns and fears with trusted companions often prevented the kind of emotional breakdown that could compromise everyone's safety. Yet through all these challenges, what shines through most clearly is the remarkable human capacity to not merely endure, but to create beauty and meaning, even in the midst of constant danger. These communities didn't just survive. They developed art, music, storytelling, and spiritual practices that enriched their lives and strengthened their bonds with one another. As seasons passed and survival techniques were refined and passed down, something profound began to emerge. The knowledge they had gained through facing countless threats wasn't just practical information. It was wisdom about human nature, about cooperation, about the delicate balance between individual needs and collective survival. These insights would prove crucial, not just for their immediate survival, but for the preservation and transmission of everything they had learned. How did they ensure that the hard-won wisdom of survival would continue to benefit future generations? How did they solve the eternal human challenge of preserving knowledge across time, making certain that the insights that kept them alive would not be lost when the original discoverers were no longer there to share them? The answer to these questions would prove to be one of humanity's greatest innovations, a system of knowledge preservation that would eventually grow into the foundations of all human culture and learning. But perhaps their greatest innovation wasn't in tools or weapons or shelters. Their greatest achievement was in creating systems for preserving and passing on the wisdom that kept them alive. Imagine yourself witnessing one of humanity's most crucial breakthroughs. Picture, if you will, the moment when human survival stopped depending solely on individual memory and began to rely on collective knowledge that could outlast any single lifetime. In the warm glow of evening fires, where families gathered after the day's work was done, something remarkable was taking place. This wasn't just social time or entertainment. These gatherings were humanity's first universities, where life-saving knowledge was systematically preserved and transmitted through carefully structured storytelling. Imagine Elena, now grown old and wise, settling into her familiar place by the central fire as younger community members arranged themselves in listening circles around her. Her voice, weathered by years but still strong with authority, would begin the ancient ritual of knowledge sharing. But these weren't simple stories. They were precisely crafted vessels designed to carry crucial survival information across generations. Picture how she might begin. Long ago, when the great ice covered the northern lands, there lived a hunter named Theron, who discovered something that saved his entire community. What followed would seem like a thrilling adventure tale to the children. but embedded within the narrative were detailed instructions for recognizing the signs of an approaching harsh winter, the specific steps needed to preserve meat for extended periods, and the locations of emergency shelter sites that had been tested and proven reliable. The storytellers developed sophisticated techniques for making information memorable and accurate. Important details were woven into rhythmic phrases that made them easier to remember. Critical facts were repeated at specific intervals throughout longer stories, ensuring that key points would stick in listeners' minds. The most crucial knowledge was embedded in multiple different tales, providing redundancy that protected against the loss of any single story. Thomas, the community's master toolmaker, had his own methods for preserving knowledge. He created teaching songs that contained precise measurements and techniques for crafting essential tools. Picture him working with young apprentices, guiding their hands as they shaped spear points while chanting verses that encoded the exact angles, temperatures, and materials needed for optimal results. The rhythm of the songs matched the rhythm of the work, making both the physical techniques and the mental knowledge easier to master and retain. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of their knowledge preservation systems was how they solved the problem of accuracy over time. They understood that stories and songs, passed from person to person over many years, could gradually change and lose important details. So they developed verification systems that protected against drift and corruption. Picture the quarterly knowledge gatherings, where the community's various specialists would come together to compare their versions of important stories and songs. If discrepancies were discovered, they would work together to determine which version was most accurate, often by testing the practical applications of different variations. These sessions served as quality control mechanisms that ensured essential information remained reliable across generations. The elderly held special status in these systems, not just because of their accumulated wisdom, but because they served as living libraries of knowledge that spanned decades of community experience. When old Henrik began to show signs of failing memory, the community didn't simply accept the loss of his knowledge. Instead, they organized intensive sessions where his stories and techniques were systematically recorded by multiple younger community members, creating redundant preservation of everything he knew. Women like Maria developed their own specialized knowledge networks focused on healing, food preparation, and child-rearing practices. These networks operated with their own storytelling traditions, their own verification systems, and their own methods for ensuring that crucial information about health and nutrition would never be lost. Picture the intimate gatherings where mothers and daughters, grandmothers and granddaughters, would share not just recipes and remedies, but the deeper understanding of how to read the signs of illness, how to adapt treatments for different individuals, and how to maintain family health through changing conditions. The knowledge preservation systems weren't just practical. They were deeply spiritual and emotional experiences that bound communities together. Participating in the transmission of knowledge was considered one of the most sacred responsibilities any community member could undertake. The storytellers weren't just teachers. They were priestesses and priests of human wisdom, guardians of everything that made survival possible. These gatherings also served crucial psychological functions. In a world where individual death was always a possibility, knowing that one's knowledge would live on provided deep comfort and meaning. Community members found profound satisfaction in contributing their discoveries and insights to the collective store of wisdom that would benefit their children and grandchildren. As these knowledge preservation systems matured, they began to generate their own innovations. Community members started experimenting with ways to combine different types of information, creating increasingly sophisticated understanding of how various aspects of survival interconnected. They developed theoretical frameworks that helped them predict how changes in one area might affect other aspects of community life. Picture Willem, now an experienced elder, working with younger hunters to develop new strategies based on patterns he had observed over decades of careful attention to animal behavior. His insights weren't just practical tips. They were the beginnings of what would eventually become systematic understanding of ecology, weather prediction, and resource management. This wasn't just education, it was a form of immortality. Through the careful preservation and transmission of knowledge, these ancient communities achieved something remarkable. They made the wisdom of the dead available to the living. A technique discovered by someone who had been gone for centuries could still save lives in the present moment. The respect accorded to these knowledge keepers reveals how deeply their communities understood the value of accumulated wisdom. They weren't just teachers or entertainers. They were the living links between past and future, the guardians of everything that made survival possible. Their words carried the authority of generations, and their memories held the keys to human flourishing. Yet they knew that preservation alone wasn't enough. Knowledge had to remain alive, dynamic, and adaptable. They developed sophisticated methods for testing and verifying information, for distinguishing between reliable wisdom and dangerous superstition. They understood that the survival of their communities depended not just on remembering the past, but on learning from it. As you rest in the gentle glow of our modern comforts, take a moment to honor these remarkable guardians of human knowledge. Their dedication, their discipline, and their deep understanding of wisdom's value laid the foundation for everything we know today. They faced the eternal human challenge of preserving what matters most and passing it on to those who come after. Yet they didn't just survive, they began to innovate. They started to look beyond mere preservation, beyond the simple transmission of existing knowledge. Something new was stirring in the human spirit, something that would eventually transform not just how they remembered the past, but how they imagined the future. As these early communities established their foundations of knowledge and understanding, something remarkable began to emerge from their daily struggles. But here's where the story takes an extraordinary turn. Picture yourself standing at the threshold of one of humanity's greatest leaps forward. Imagine, if you will, a moment when necessity became the mother of invention, when human ingenuity first sparked against the harsh realities of survival. Picture a small settlement nestled between rolling hills, where the winter winds carried both promise and peril. The people had learned to read the seasons, to store their grain, and to maintain their fires through the longest nights. But knowledge alone wasn't enough. They needed tools, techniques, and innovations that would transform their relationship with the world around them. In these cozy corners of human development, we witness the birth of technological advancement born from genuine need. Picture the scene. A young craftsman, perhaps named Marcus, working late into the evening by flickering torchlight, notices how his bronze tools dull too quickly against harder materials. Feel his frustration as he faces endless sharpening, the precious time lost that drives him to experiment. Night after night he tends his forge, adjusting the heat, mixing different ores, searching for a solution that seems just beyond his grasp. Night after night he tends his forge, adjusting the heat, mixing different ores, searching for a solution that seems just beyond his grasp. This was the moment when human creativity truly began to flourish, not through grand proclamations or sudden revelations, but through the persistent tinkering of determined minds facing daily challenges. Each small breakthrough built upon the knowledge gathered by previous generations, creating a gentle cascade of innovation that would reshape civilization. Consider the revolutionary moment when iron began to replace bronze. This wasn't merely a technological shift, it was a transformation of human potential itself. The harder, more durable metal allowed for stronger plows that could break tougher soil, weapons that could defend communities more effectively, and tools that lasted through countless seasons of use. Yet this advancement came with its own hardships, its own learning curve that tested human resilience. Its own learning curve that tested human resilience. Picture the first blacksmiths grappling with higher temperatures, with unfamiliar techniques, with metals that behave differently under their hammers. Imagine the sting of burns on their hands, the disappointment of failed attempts that left them with brittle, useless pieces of metal, the genuine fear that they might never master this new craft. Yet through these hardships, something beautiful emerges. The unbreakable human spirit persevered, driven by the promise of progress and the needs of their communities. In workshops filled with the warm glow of forge fires, innovation became a collaborative effort. Skilled artisans shared their discoveries, teaching apprentices not just the techniques, but the problem-solving mindset that made breakthrough possible. Knowledge flowed like molten metal, taking new shapes with each generation of craftsmen who added their own insights to the collective understanding. Picture yourself joining this intimate scene. Imagine a cozy hearth, where an elderly metalworker sits with young apprentices, sharing stories of failed experiments that eventually led to success. The crackling fire illuminates faces filled with curiosity and determination. As wisdom passes from one generation to the next in the gentle rhythm of mentorship and discovery. The development of advanced metallurgy sparked innovations across every aspect of human life. Better tools led to improved agriculture, which supported larger populations, which in turn created more specialized craftsmen who could push the boundaries of technology even further. It was a beautiful cycle of human ingenuity feeding upon itself, creating abundance from scarcity, solutions from problems. Transportation began to evolve as stronger metals allowed for more sophisticated wheels, axles, and cart construction. Trade routes expanded, connecting distant communities and allowing the exchange of not just goods, but ideas and techniques. A merchant traveling with his iron-wheeled cart might carry not only grain and textiles, but also the knowledge of new agricultural methods learned from farmers 3 valleys away. Communication systems grew more sophisticated as communities developed better tools for creating writing materials, more durable surfaces for recording information, and improved methods for preserving knowledge across time. The gentle scratch of reed against papyrus, the careful carving of symbols into prepared wood, the satisfied smile of a scribe who had just perfected a new technique for mixing ink that wouldn't fade with time. Picture vast networks of human connection forming across the landscape, each link strengthened by innovations that made communication faster, more reliable, and more accessible. Messages that once took weeks to deliver could now travel in days, carried by messengers equipped with better gear, and traveling along improved pathways maintained by communities working together. As these technological advances accumulated, they began to change the very nature of human society. Specialization became possible on a scale never before imagined. A community might support not just one blacksmith, but multiple craftsmen each focusing on different aspects of metalwork, one specializing in weapons, another in tools, a third in decorative items that brought beauty into daily life. This specialization created new forms of interdependence, binding communities together through webs of mutual benefit and shared knowledge. The potter relied on the blacksmith for better tools. The blacksmith depended on the farmer for food. The farmer needed the potter's vessels for storage, and all of them benefited from the innovations that each specialist brought to their craft. Imagine the satisfaction of a community celebrating the completion of their first iron plow, gathered around a cozy fire as the metalworker explains how this new tool will make their spring planting easier and more productive. The warm glow of the flames reflects off faces filled with hope and excitement for the growing season ahead, united by their shared commitment to progress and mutual support. Yet as these innovations flourished and communities grew more sophisticated, new challenges began to emerge. Different groups developed different techniques, different priorities, different ways of organizing their increasingly elaborate societies. The bonds that had once united small communities in common purpose began to strain under the weight of competing interests and expanding ambitions. The stage was being set for conflicts that would test everything these civilizations had built together. But harmony wasn't guaranteed, and the innovations that had brought such promise would soon face their greatest challenge in the form of human nature itself. As our village embraced these remarkable innovations, something unexpected began to stir beneath the surface of their harmonious community. What happened next reveals something profound about human nature itself. Imagine yourself feeling the subtle shift in the air as change brings both promise and uncertainty. Picture, if you will, the gentle tension that can arise when progress moves faster than hearts can follow. It started subtly, as these things often do. While Maya's workshops brought wonder and efficiency, some of the older craftsmen found themselves questioning their place in this rapidly changing world. Imagine Thomas, a weathered blacksmith whose hands had shaped iron for 40 years, watching as new metal alloys created stronger tools in half the time. The pride he once felt in his craft began to give way to something more unsettling. The fear that his skills, passed down through generations, might no longer hold value. Picture Sarah, too, the village's most respected healer, observing as botanical extracts seemed to work miracles that her traditional remedies took weeks to achieve. In the quiet of her cottage, surrounded by dried herbs that had been her companions for decades, she wondered if the wisdom of her grandmother's generation was being swept away by this tide of innovation. These were not angry souls, dear listener, but rather gentle people experiencing the very human struggle of finding their footing when the ground beneath them shifts. In the cozy corner of the marketplace, conversations began to carry whispers of uncertainty. Are we moving too fast? Some wondered aloud. What happens to the old ways that served us so well? The tension reached a particular moment of crystallization during what should have been a celebration. Maya had invited the entire village to witness the completion of her most ambitious project yet. A water purification system that could provide clean drinking water for years to come. As families gathered in the village square, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of evening torches, the demonstration began. The system worked beautifully, as Maya knew it would. Crystal clear water flowed from what had previously been a murky, uncertain source. Children cheered, parents marveled, and the practical benefits were immediately obvious to everyone present. Yet in the midst of this triumph, old Henrik, the village's senior well-keeper, stood quietly at the edge of the crowd, his weathered face reflecting something more complex than simple joy. When Maya called for questions and comments, Henrik stepped forward with the careful dignity that had always characterized his speech. "This is remarkable work," he began, his voice carrying both genuine admiration and something else. Something that made the crowd fall silent. But I wonder, what becomes of the knowledge my father taught me? And his father taught him about reading the water, about finding the seasonal changes, about understanding what the earth is telling us through its gifts. His question hung in the air like smoke from the torches, creating a moment of uncomfortable recognition. Maya, for all her brilliance and innovation, felt a flutter of uncertainty. Had she been so focused on improving efficiency that she had overlooked something essential about the wisdom Henrik represented? This wasn't about old versus new, tradition versus progress. This was about something deeper. The fear that in their rush toward technological advancement, they might lose touch with the more subtle forms of knowledge that had sustained them through countless generations. The fear that innovation, for all its benefits, might come at the cost of connection. To the land, to ancestral wisdom, to the slower rhythms of life that had always provided comfort and stability. But what happened next revealed the true character of this community. Maya didn't become defensive or dismiss Henrik's concerns. Instead, she moved toward him with the gentle respect that had always characterized the village's approach to conflict resolution. "Henrik," she said, her voice soft but carrying clearly across the square, "your knowledge is exactly what this innovation needs. I can make the water cleaner, but you understand what it means. Would you help me learn?" Picture the transformation that occurred in that moment. Henrik's shoulders straightened, not with defiance but with renewed purpose. The crowd's tension dissolved into something warmer. A recognition that progress didn't require abandoning wisdom, that innovation could honor tradition, even as it transformed it. In the weeks that followed, something beautiful emerged from this initial conflict. Maya and Henrik began working together, combining her technical innovations with his deep understanding of natural water systems. The result was more than either could have achieved alone. A water management system that was both efficient and sustainable, both innovative and respectful of the natural rhythms Henrik had spent a lifetime learning to read. Other partnerships began to form across the village. Sarah, the traditional healer, found herself collaborating with Maya on botanical projects that enhanced the effectiveness of time-tested remedies. Thomas, the blacksmith, discovered that his deep understanding of metal behavior was exactly what Maya needed to refine her more complex innovations. The village learned something crucial through this process, that harmony wasn't the absence of conflict, but the ability to work through differences in ways that honored everyone involved. They developed practices for managing the tensions that inevitably arose when different perspectives met, creating space for both innovation and tradition, both progress and preservation. These lessons in conflict resolution would prove invaluable as their community continued to grow and change. They learned to see disagreement not as threat to their unity, but as opportunity for deeper understanding. They developed the social skills that would allow them to navigate the increasingly complex challenges that lay ahead. Through it all, they reached turning points that transformed not just their technology, but their understanding of what it meant to be human together. The conflicts they faced and resolved became the foundation for even greater innovations, both technical and social, that would serve them well in the triumphs to come. Picture this moment of profound transformation. Not the end of their struggles, but the beginning of their greatest discoveries about human potential, and the remarkable things that become possible when people choose to work through their differences rather than be divided by them. As winter gave way to spring that year, something unprecedented began to unfold in their community. The conflicts they had navigated so carefully had unlocked something deep within the human spirit. The recognition that their greatest innovations would come not from individual brilliance, but from the magic that happened when different forms of wisdom merged into something entirely new. Picture Maya standing in her workshop one morning, surrounded by the fruits of her collaborations with Henrik, Sarah, Thomas, and others. The water purification system hummed quietly in the corner, but it was so much more than a technical achievement now. It incorporated Henrik's understanding of seasonal water variations, Sarah's knowledge of which purification plants worked best at different times of year, and Thomas's innovations in creating durable, self-maintaining components. But the real breakthrough wasn't technical. It was human. For the first time in their community's history, they had successfully merged different ways of knowing into approaches that honored both innovation and tradition. This represented a profound evolution in human consciousness, the birth of what we might now call interdisciplinary thinking. The success of these collaborations created a ripple effect throughout the village. Other craftspeople began seeking out partnerships that crossed traditional boundaries. The baker started working with the herbalist to create breads that provided better nutrition. The toolmakers collaborated with the hunters to design implements that were both more effective and more respectful of the animals they pursued. Picture the evening gatherings during this remarkable period. The conversations around the central fires buzzed with excitement as community members shared their latest discoveries. But these weren't just technical discussions. They were explorations of how different forms of knowledge could enhance each other, how ancient wisdom could inform modern innovation, how individual insights could serve collective well-being. Maya found herself at the center of many of these conversations, but in a role she hadn't expected. Rather than being seen as the sole innovator, she had become something more valuable, a facilitator of innovation, someone who could help others see connections they might not have discovered alone. Her greatest gift wasn't her technical skill, though that remained impressive, but her ability to create spaces where different types of expertise could meet and merge. The breakthrough that would define this period came when the community faced their most serious challenge yet, a series of crop failures that threatened their food security for the coming winter. In the past, such a crisis might have created panic, conflict, and desperate competition for limited resources. Instead, it became the catalyst for their most remarkable collaborative innovation yet. Picture the emergency gathering where the crisis was first discussed. Rather than looking for someone to blame or quick fixes that might help some at the expense of others, the community took a different approach. They systematically inventoried all their different forms of knowledge: Henrik's understanding of water systems, Sarah's botanical expertise, Thomas's metallurgy skills, Maya's innovation techniques, and the specialized knowledge of dozens of other community members. What emerged from this inventory was a comprehensive response that no single individual could have conceived alone. They developed new methods for extending their existing food stores, identified alternative nutrition sources that had been overlooked, created preservation techniques that combined traditional methods with innovative approaches, and established trading relationships with neighboring communities that provided mutual benefit during times of scarcity. But perhaps most remarkably, they used the crisis as an opportunity to develop more resilient agricultural systems for the future. Picture the experimental plots they established, where traditional farming wisdom was enhanced by Maya's soil improvement techniques, where Sarah's botanical knowledge informed crop selection, where Henrik's understanding of water patterns guided irrigation planning. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Not only did they successfully navigate the immediate crisis, but they emerged from it with food production capabilities that were more robust and sustainable than anything they had achieved before. They had transformed a potential disaster into a breakthrough that would benefit their community for generations. As word of their success spread to neighboring communities, visitors began arriving to learn from their approaches. Maya and her collaborators found themselves teaching not just technical methods, but the collaborative processes that had made their innovations possible. They were sharing something more valuable than any single invention. They were demonstrating a new way of approaching complex challenges through collective wisdom. Picture Sarah addressing a group of healers from distant communities, explaining how her botanical knowledge had been enhanced through collaboration with Maya's innovation methods and Henrik's natural systems expertise. Her audience wasn't just learning about new healing techniques. They were discovering how different forms of knowledge could strengthen each other when brought together with respect and openness. Thomas, meanwhile, was demonstrating his metallurgy innovations to craftsmen who had traveled great distances to observe his techniques. But his most important lesson wasn't about temperature, control, or alloy composition. It was about how individual expertise became more powerful when it was developed in collaboration with others who brought different perspectives and skills. The community's approach to breakthrough innovation became legendary in their region. Other settlements began adopting their collaborative methods, creating a network of communities that shared not just technical innovations, but social innovations that made collective problem-solving more effective. As the seasons turned and their collaborative successes multiplied, something even more profound began to emerge. These weren't just practical achievements. They were demonstrations of human potential that had never been fully realized before. They were showing that when people chose cooperation over competition, when they honored different forms of wisdom, when they approached challenges with curiosity rather than fear, there was virtually no limit to what they could accomplish together. Their victories were echoing through time, creating ripples that would influence human development for generations to come. They had discovered something fundamental about the conditions that allow human beings to thrive, not just as individuals, but as conscious collaborators in creating the kind of world they wanted to live in. These breakthrough moments had created something that would outlast any individual achievement. They had established a legacy of human cooperation that would inspire countless future generations to reach for possibilities that might otherwise have remained unimaginable. But the most remarkable part of their story is yet to come. Picture, if you will, a moment 50 years after Maya's first breakthrough innovations, when a young woman named Elena, granddaughter of the village but inheritor of something much larger, stands at the edge of what has become a thriving center of learning and innovation. Imagine yourself standing beside her, witnessing the remarkable transformation. The single village has grown into a network of communities that spans the region, connected not by conquest or dominion, but by shared commitment to the collaborative principles that Maya's generation had discovered. Elena carries in her blood, quite literally, the genetic legacy of those ancient survivors who had faced humanity's darkest hour and refused to surrender. But she also carries something more: the cultural legacy of communities that had learned to transform challenge into opportunity, conflict into collaboration, individual wisdom into collective breakthrough. Picture her walking through the innovation centers that had grown from Maya's humble workshop. Here, craftspeople from distant communities work alongside local innovators, sharing techniques and developing new approaches that none of them could have conceived alone. There, agricultural specialists collaborate with water management experts and botanical healers to develop farming systems that work in harmony with natural cycles rather than fighting against them. But perhaps most remarkably, Elena sees evidence everywhere of how these collaborative innovations have transformed not just technology, but human consciousness itself. The children growing up in this environment don't think in terms of individual competition or zero-sum conflicts. They instinctively look for ways to combine different perspectives to find solutions that benefit everyone involved, to approach problems with curiosity and collaboration rather than fear and domination. Picture Elena pausing at a memorial that honors not just Maya and the other original innovators, but the collaborative spirit they had embodied. The inscription reads not just their names, but the principles they had lived by. Innovation serves the whole. Wisdom grows through sharing. Breakthrough comes from bringing together what has been kept apart. The genetic evidence is clear. Elena and her generation carry the DNA of those ancient bottleneck survivors, the 2,000 souls who had somehow persevered through humanity's most precarious moment. But they also carry something equally precious: the cultural DNA of communities that had learned to make breakthrough innovation a way of life, a natural expression of human potential working in harmony. Consider the profound implications of this inheritance. The innovations that began with Maya's water purification system had evolved into comprehensive approaches to sustainable living that had spread across the known world. But more than that, the collaborative methods that had made those innovations possible had become the foundation for forms of human organization that honored both individual creativity and collective well-being. Picture Elena's children learning not just technical skills, but the social and emotional intelligence that made collaborative breakthrough possible. They were being taught to listen with genuine curiosity, to share their discoveries with generous enthusiasm, to approach differences as opportunities for learning rather than threats to be defended against. The legacy wasn't just in the remarkable technologies that had improved life for countless communities. It wasn't even primarily in the agricultural, water management, and crafting innovations that had spread across the region and beyond. The real legacy was in the demonstration that human beings, when organized around principles of collaboration rather than competition, were capable of creating solutions to challenges that had previously seemed impossible. Picture Elena standing at the center of the memorial, surrounded by representatives from dozens of communities that had adopted the collaborative innovation methods pioneered by Maya's generation. They weren't gathered to worship the past, but to commit to carrying forward the principles that had made such remarkable achievements possible. As Elena speaks to the assembled crowd, her words carry the authority of someone who has seen these principles work across generations, across communities, across the full range of human challenges. "We are the children of survivors," she says, her voice carrying clearly across the gathering. "But we are also the children of innovators. We inherited not just the determination to survive, but the wisdom to thrive." She pauses, looking out at faces that represent not just her own community, but the dozens of settlements that had been touched by the collaborative breakthroughs of the previous generations. "Our ancestors gave us the gift of life, but Maya and her collaborators gave us something equally precious: the knowledge that human beings working together can solve any challenge, can overcome any obstacle, can create any future they dare to envision." Picture the moment when Elena unveils the new project that will define her generation's contribution to this legacy of collaborative innovation. It's not a single technical achievement, but something more ambitious: a comprehensive educational system that will ensure these collaborative principles spread to every human settlement they can reach. The project represents everything they have learned about how to develop human potential through collective wisdom. Children will learn technical skills, but they will also learn the emotional and social capabilities that make collaboration possible. They will study individual achievements, but they will also practice the group dynamics that turn individual insights into collective breakthroughs. As you rest in the gentle comfort of your modern bed, picture yourself as part of this legacy. The collaborative innovations that began with Maya's water purification system have evolved and spread across centuries, contributing to the foundation of everything we have achieved as a species. The principles of cooperation, curiosity, and collective problem-solving that they discovered continue to influence human development today. But most importantly, carry with you the recognition that this legacy isn't just something to admire from a distance. You are part of it. In your DNA, you carry the genetic inheritance of those ancient survivors who refused to give up hope. In your daily life, you have countless opportunities to honor the collaborative principles that Maya and her partners discovered. Every time you choose cooperation over competition, every moment when you share your knowledge with generous enthusiasm, every instance when you approach a challenge with curiosity rather than fear, you are participating in this ancient legacy of human breakthrough and collaborative innovation. The legacy they left isn't just in the technologies they developed or the communities they built. Their true gift to us is the demonstration that human beings, working together with respect and creativity, are capable of creating solutions to challenges that seem impossible when faced alone. Sleep peacefully, knowing that you are part of this remarkable inheritance, and that their story of collaborative breakthrough continues in every choice you make to work with others, rather than against them. In every moment when you choose hope over fear, innovation over stagnation, and collective wisdom over individual limitation. And so, we arrive at the remarkable truth we set out to discover together. You now possess something extraordinary. The complete story of humanity's most astonishing survival tale. From the genetic bottleneck that nearly ended our species to the collaborative innovations that transformed scattered survivors into thriving civilizations. When we began this journey, I promised to share with you the genetic evidence that reveals humanity's most crucial chapter. You've seen how cutting-edge DNA research uncovered those critical 70,000 years ago when our entire species balanced on the edge of extinction. You've witnessed how those remarkable 2,000 survivors carried within their genes not just the blueprint for physical survival, but the capacity for the very qualities that define us today. Resilience, creativity, and the unbreakable will to persevere. But more than that, you've discovered how their legacy extends far beyond historical curiosity. Picture the invisible threads now connecting their ancient wisdom to your daily life. The principles they discovered about collaborative innovation, the social technologies they developed for working through conflict, the demonstration that human potential multiplies rather than divides when shared. These insights offer profound guidance for the challenges we face in our own modern world. You've learned how Maya, Elena, Henrik, Sarah, and Thomas transformed individual wisdom into collective breakthrough. You've seen how their collaborative spirit enabled innovations that no single person could have achieved alone. Now picture yourself carrying this wisdom into your own daily life. Approaching the challenges you face at work, in your community, in your relationships, with the same spirit that enabled their remarkable achievements. The practical wisdom you've gained tonight offers immediate gifts for your own life. You've learned how taking a few deep breaths each morning, setting an intention for how you want to show up in the world, connects you to the mindful awareness that sustained our ancestors through their darkest hours. The simple act of writing down 3 things you're grateful for each evening creates your own cozy corner of reflection, honoring the same gratitude practices that helped ancient communities find light during endless winters. You've discovered something crucial about community and connection that those remarkable ancestors knew instinctively. They understood that isolation weakens us, while authentic relationships strengthens us beyond measure. In times of difficulty, they didn't retreat into solitude and self-reliance alone. Instead, they reached out. They asked for help. They offered support to others even when their own resources felt limited. Wisdom that speaks directly to our modern world of digital connection but emotional isolation. The medieval villagers who gathered to share meals and stories, who worked together on common projects, who celebrated and mourned as one community. They show us a different way of being human together. They remind us that vulnerability is not weakness, but the doorway to genuine connection and mutual support. Consider how you might create or strengthen these kinds of authentic connections in your own life. It doesn't require grand gestures or dramatic changes. Perhaps it's simply making eye contact and truly listening when someone speaks to you. Maybe it's reaching out to check on a neighbor or friend, offering help without expecting anything in return. These small acts of connection create ripples of healing that extend far beyond what we can see. The people in our stories also discovered something beautiful about finding purpose and meaning in the midst of difficulty. They learned that meaning isn't something we have to search for in distant places or extraordinary circumstances. Instead, it emerges naturally when we align our daily actions with our deepest values, when we contribute something positive to the world around us, however small it might seem. A medieval baker who made sure bread was available for his community wasn't just earning a living. He was participating in something sacred, the ancient human practice of nourishing one another. A village healer who sat with the sick wasn't just practicing medicine, she was embodying compassion and hope. They found meaning in the ordinary act of showing up for life with presence and care. You can discover this same sense of purpose in your modern life. It might be found in the way you treat a struggling coworker with kindness, in the attention you give to your daily work, in the love you pour into caring for your family or friends. Purpose isn't reserved for the famous or the powerful. It's available to anyone who chooses to live with intention and heart. As we approach the peaceful conclusion of our journey through time, you can feel the profound satisfaction of a promise fulfilled. You came seeking the story of humanity's most astonishing survival, and you've received something even greater. You've discovered not just how we survived, but how we learned to thrive through collaboration, innovation, and the unbreakable bonds of community. Picture yourself carrying these ancient gifts of wisdom forward into your own life. Feel the steady confidence that comes from knowing you possess tools and practices that sustained our species through its darkest hour and can sustain you through any challenge. Envision yourself moving through your days with the gentle strength of those who faced uncertainty before you and found ways to flourish. The treasures we've uncovered together aren't just inspirational ideas to admire from a distance. They're practical gifts you can unwrap and use immediately. The wisdom of working with natural rhythms instead of against them. The power of small, consistent practices. The strength that comes from genuine community and connection. The meaning that emerges when we align our actions with our deepest values. And as you settle into the peaceful conclusion of our time together, let yourself feel the deep satisfaction of knowing that you are connected to a long lineage of wise and resilient human beings who found ways to create light in dark times, hope in difficult circumstances, and beauty in the midst of chaos. Rest now in the comfort of this ancient wisdom, knowing that it lives within you, ready to guide and support you through all the seasons of your life. And so, dear listener, as we arrive at the final moments of our journey through time, picture yourself gently settling into this moment of profound connection to all of human history. Let yourself sink deeper into the comfort of your bed, knowing that every story we've shared tonight has been building toward this moment of perfect peace. Imagine, if you will, that you're standing at the edge of all these timelines we've explored together, watching as each thread of history weaves itself into a beautiful tapestry of human experience. The ancient civilizations we visited, the medieval villages where we warmed ourselves by flickering hearths, the Renaissance workshops filled with the scent of fresh paint and possibility, the colonial settlements where communities gathered around shared tables, the industrial cities where progress marched forward with determination, and all the way to our modern world where innovation continues to shape tomorrow. Each era we explored tonight faced its own unique challenges, its own winter of hardship, its own moments when survival seemed uncertain. Yet in every single timeline, in every corner of history we visited, there was something that remained constant, something that never wavered even in the darkest times. The unbreakable human spirit, the capacity for resilience, the way people found warmth in each other's company, hope in the promise of spring, and strength in the simple act of carrying on. Picture yourself now as a guardian of all these stories, a keeper of these peaceful moments we've shared. You've witnessed the courage of ancient builders who raised temples that still stand today. You've felt the warmth of medieval hearths where families gathered through long winter nights. You've breathed the air of Renaissance studios where dreams took shape in marble and paint. You've walked through colonial gardens where communities planted seeds for futures they would never see. You've stood in the workshops of the Industrial Revolution where human ingenuity transformed the world. And you've experienced the rapid changes of our modern era, where each new day brings fresh possibilities. As you rest here in your comfortable bed, surrounded by the gentle darkness of night, you can feel the weight of all this history settling around you like the softest blanket. Not the burden of time, but the comfort of continuity. The knowledge that you are part of an unbroken chain of human experience that stretches back to the very beginning of civilization and forward into a future filled with infinite potential. The breath you're breathing now connects you to the first humans who gazed at stars and wondered about their place in the universe. The beating of your heart echoes the rhythms of countless generations who faced challenges with courage, who created beauty from chaos, who chose love over fear, hope over despair. You carry within you the dreams of ancestors who dared to imagine better worlds, and the responsibility of passing those dreams forward to generations yet to come. Picture the golden thread that connects you to Maya and her innovations, to Henrik and his wisdom about natural systems, to Sarah and her healing knowledge, to Thomas and his craftsmanship, to Elena and her educational vision. Their discoveries, their collaborations, their breakthroughs in understanding how human beings can work together to solve any challenge. All of this lives on in the world they helped create, the world you inhabit today. As sleep begins to claim you, let yourself feel the profound gratitude that comes from recognizing your place in this grand story of human resilience and creativity. You are not just an observer of history, you are its living continuation. In your daily choices, your acts of kindness, your moments of courage, your efforts to connect with others and contribute something positive to the world, you are writing the next chapter of this remarkable human story. The innovations and collaboration that began with Maya's community continue to ripple through time, appearing in every workplace where people choose cooperation over competition, in every neighborhood where strangers become friends, in every family where different generations share their wisdom with each other. The legacy of those ancient bottleneck survivors who refuse to give up hope lives on in every moment when you choose to persist through difficulty, to help others in need, to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. Rest now, dear listener, in the perfect peace that comes from knowing you are held by something larger than yourself, the vast loving embrace of human community that spans all of time and space. Feel yourself sinking deeper into comfort, surrounded by the warm presence of all those who came before you, and the bright promise of all those who will come after. Your breath is slowing, becoming deeper, more peaceful. Your body is releasing the tensions of the day, settling into the profound relaxation that comes from knowing you are exactly where you belong. Your mind is becoming quiet, filled not with worry or plans, but with the gentle satisfaction of a journey well traveled and stories well told. As you drift into sleep, carry with you the warmth of those ancient hearths where communities gathered to share their wisdom. Feel the strength of those collaborative innovations that turned individual insights into collective breakthroughs. Remember the beauty of those moments when human creativity flourished despite every challenge, when love triumphed over fear, when hope opened doorways to possibilities that had never existed before. Sleep deeply, knowing that you are part of this magnificent continuum of human experience. Dream sweetly, surrounded by the loving presence of all those ancestral innovators who discovered that the greatest breakthroughs come not from competition, but from collaboration. Rest peacefully, confident that their legacy of wisdom and resilience lives on in you, ready to guide and inspire you through all the adventures that await. Good night, dear traveler through time. May your dreams be filled with the gentle comfort of ancient wisdom and the bright promise of tomorrow's possibilities. You are now part of this magnificent continuum of human experience, carrying within you both the genetic legacy of those ancient survivors and the wisdom of collaborative innovation that transformed scattered families into thriving civilizations. In your daily choices, your acts of kindness, your moments of courage, you write the next chapter of this remarkable human story. If this journey through humanity's most extraordinary survival tale has brought you peace and wonder, if you'd like to continue exploring the remarkable stories of human resilience and timeless wisdom that connects us all, I invite you to join our growing community of fellow travelers through time. Together, we'll discover more hidden treasures from history's most inspiring moments. Sleep well, dear traveler, knowing you carry the unbreakable spirit of humanity's greatest survivors. Sweet dreams filled with the comfort of ancient wisdom and the bright promise of tomorrow's possibilities.